You're listening to the Fed and Fearless podcast. On today's episode, Rachel Murray is setting the record straight about sugar addiction, and she's helping you figure out if sugar addiction might be a problem for you and what to do about it. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm your host, Laura Schoenfeld, a registered dietitian, nutrition business coach, and online entrepreneur with over 10 years of experience in online business. And I'm here to show you everything I've learned about creating a life and a business that nourishes you. On this podcast, we'll talk about the lifestyle habits, practical strategies, mindset shifts, and leaps of faith required to build a healthy body, a powerful mind, a strong spirit, and a successful business. Hey there, welcome back to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm Laura Schoenfeld, your host as always, and today's topic is definitely a little controversial, but you guys know me, I'm not afraid to talk about controversial things on this show, and I think that the way that we address this topic today is actually really nuanced and will actually help people understand why it's so complex and controversial in the first place, and to help people take a little bit of a more neutral approach to their perspective on the topic. So the topic we're talking about today is sugar addiction. And the reason I say it's controversial is because just like so many things in the nutrition space, there's a lot of different perspectives on the concept of sugar addiction. Some people believe everybody's addicted to sugar and sugar is by nature addictive and it lights your brain up the way cocaine does, and there's no way that anyone could eat sugar in moderation. And then on the other end of that spectrum, you get the people who believe that sugar addiction is total nonsense and that the only reason why people struggle with sugar is because they try to avoid it. And as you guys know, if you've been listening to me for any length of time, you know that I tend to feel like there's a lot of gray area when it comes to most nutrition topics, and certainly that's how I feel about sugar addiction. So what I'm hoping is that our conversation today will help you look at sugar addiction as something that is not necessarily affecting everybody, because I certainly don't believe that everybody's addicted to sugar or becomes addicted to sugar, but also recognizing that much like other types of addictions, that there are certain people out there that do actually have addictive behaviors and addictive tendencies with sugar, and they may benefit from a different approach than somebody who doesn't have that addictive tendency. So that's my hope for today's episode, that you'll walk away really understanding what does sugar addiction look like, who actually has sugar addiction, understanding that not everybody's addicted to sugar, but that if you are actually dealing with a true addiction, that there are ways that you can address it and heal from that and live your life in a more quality way. So my guest today is Rachel Murray. Rachel owns and runs her holistic nutrition business, Rachel Murray Holistic Nutrition, out of Elora, Ontario. Her passion for health and wellness was established while earning her Bachelor of Science, specializing in health promotion at Laurentian University. After this, she went on to complete a bachelor's degree in nursing and worked in the hospital setting for 8 years. During this time, Rachel struggled with allergies and digestive issues. A few years later, thyroid and fertility issues also surfaced. After conventional treatments only masked symptoms and did not address the root cause of the problem, she was determined to find a natural solution. It was these struggles and experiences that initiated her discovery and pursuit of a holistic nutrition career, which she has found better serves her passion for educating and helping people live their best life. Rachel takes the whole person into account when she completes her assessments and is therefore able to create an individualized wellness plan to meet her clients where they're at, and she's committed to their success. Her specialty is working with people who have sugar and carb addiction, which she came on rather serendipitously, but has truly found her passion for working with this incredible population. A few things you may not know about Rachel is that she rides a motorcycle, has been hot air ballooning, and went canyoning in icy waters in Switzerland on her honeymoon. Rachel's a graduate of the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition and has completed multiple advanced nutrition training courses. She is a current student and she's an alumni of the Nutrition Business Accelerator program, which is how we met and how we got connected to do this podcast interview. So I think you're going to really enjoy Rachel's perspective. She definitely is not afraid to, ruffle some feathers when it comes to the concept of sugar addiction. And my hope, as I mentioned before, is that you can walk away with a better understanding of sugar addiction, who is affected by it, what we can do about it, and how to know if it's actually an addictive issue for you, or if possibly you're just struggling with some problematic behaviors around sugar, which, as you will learn, are two totally different things. So without further ado, here is Rachel Murray. All right, everybody. Well, I am so excited to have with us on the show today, Rachel Murray. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast, Rachel.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I'm sure our topic today is going to be a little controversial. And as my listeners know, we don't shy away from controversial topics on this show. So I'm excited to chat with you. And this is one that we haven't really discussed yet, but I think it's really important, especially in the last couple of years with, I'm sure, a lot of unfortunate changes to, well, you're in Canada, so let's just say our continent's health behaviors and maybe some bad habits that we've developed that are not conducive to health because of the response to the pandemic that we're still currently dealing with. So before we get started with chatting about sugar addiction, which is our topic for today, I would love to hear your story. How did you become passionate about helping people who struggle with sugar?
Sure. So I'll try not to go too far back, but I've always been interested in health. I originally did an undergrad in health promotion, kind of wanting to go on the preventative side of healthcare, but serendipitously went into nursing. And I did that for about 8 years in a hospital setting, and just found that I wasn't able to accomplish what I set out to do. I wanted to help people get well, but I felt like I was just putting Band-Aids on problems. So I then went into holistic nutrition, both to help with my own health problems, but I did want to implement that into my nursing career as well. But unfortunately, I just came to a point where I felt like it was time to leave nursing and focus specifically on holistic nutrition. And I did that for about 3 years. And I was more of a general practitioner. I saw all kinds of different clients for different reasons. And I came upon a point where I had this really difficult client, not difficult personality-wise, but just difficult with her health and everything that was going on. And at the same time, I came upon this podcast of this woman named Bitten Johnson. And she is known as the pioneer in the sugar addiction recovery world. And that podcast just literally changed my life. Everything that she was talking about resonated with what I was trying to help my clients do. So throughout that path, I went down there looking to help my clients, but I actually found that I needed help myself. And through the process of getting to know Bitten Johnson and completing her sugar assessment, which is something I can talk about later if you'd like, I discovered that I was actually a sugar addict. And while I was never really overweight, and from the outside, everybody thought that I ate healthy, I was actually struggling with the sugar addiction. And that was just a little over a year ago. So this past year, I've really made this monumental pivot in my own health and in my business to focus on helping people with sugar addiction. So that basically brings us up to speed today.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting. You mentioned that you had a quote unquote healthy diet, but that you discovered that sugar was actually a big issue for you. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think a lot of times when people think about sugar addiction, they're imagining people that are eating like a tray of cupcakes in a sitting or, drinking soda all day. And I'm guessing that for a lot of people, that's not what it looks like. And it may actually look like a quote unquote healthy diet.
Yeah, definitely. So for myself, the addiction part of it was a big part of it was really just that constant thinking about the food. And when I switched into holistic nutrition and started learning a lot more about food, some of that kind of merged into creating healthy keto desserts or healthy alternatives. But it was also always like trying to reach that end goal of getting that sweet taste. So So that's how it showed up for me. But yeah, definitely. I mean, people who are underweight, normal weight, and overweight can all be addicted to sugar. It doesn't discriminate your body size. So yeah, you can't tell from the outside whether somebody is sugar addicted or not.
That's interesting that you mentioned the keto dessert thing, because I would have thought you were going to say something like having like juices or having lots of, like whole grains, that kind of thing that was causing you to have like blood sugar issues. But it sounds like for you, it had more to do with that desire for the flavor as opposed to it being specifically like a blood sugar issue. Is that right?
For sure. And I think the blood sugar issue does definitely still play into it. I think that there's ways around it, like you said, getting the keto desserts, but I think that the blood sugar roller coaster definitely still plays a role and that is one of the biggest things that we see people who are sugar addicted, they have the symptoms of that. And that volatile blood sugar does really like wreak havoc on our mental and emotional state of being too. So, yeah.
So I'd love to hear a little bit more about, I guess, the definition of sugar addiction, especially because I think, as just demonstrated here, there might be some confusion about like, what are we talking about when we talk about sugar addiction and how is it actually affecting the body? Because again, like I know blood sugar is something that most nutritionists at least touch on, right? I think it's being in the Nutrition Business Accelerator program. I'm sure you've seen a lot of people's programs address blood sugar because it's such a huge impact on so many different health conditions. But I feel like with sugar addiction, it sounds like maybe there's a different piece that we need to be looking at. So can you just describe for us like the definition of sugar addiction and how would you actually define sugar addiction from more of like a physiological perspective?
Sure. Yeah. I think in terms of, even simplifying it further, just looking at addiction itself, any substance that changes your state of being is going to potentially be addictive. So any substance that can be psychoactive, and sugar is proven to be psychoactive, can be addictive. So like we know that alcohol, we know that prescription and non-prescription drugs can all be addictive. And it's because of that psychoactive piece that really determines that addiction. So not everyone, obviously, that eats sugar or drinks alcohol becomes addicted. So it's a very individualized thing that happens in our brain. And it's something that we're born with. It's not something that we cause. So that's one of the biggest key takeaways that I like to really hit home with my clients is that they did not do anything wrong. There's not anything that they need to feel guilty or shameful about. This is just how their brain was wired. And we like to tell people that they just have a special brain. And once they learn that and how to manage that, then the sugar addiction becomes a lot less scary because you have options and answers of how to deal with it.
I find that so interesting because I feel like, and we'll talk about this later, but I feel like one of the common arguments against the concept of sugar addiction is that, they compare it to something like cocaine or like a prescription drug and say, oh, well, you're not having that kind of reaction to it. And if you were, you'd be having like crazy withdrawal symptoms after pulling it out. And I think it's interesting you mentioned other types of addictions because I think sometimes we forget that you can be addicted to something that isn't even something you're consuming, right? Like you can be addicted to sex, you can be addicted to gambling, you could be addicted to shopping. There's so many things that like they're affecting your brain. Obviously, they're creating a brain response, but it's not necessarily like something you're consuming. So I would think that with sugar, yes, that there's going to be potentially like the physical changes that happen when you consume sugar, but I would imagine that there's a big behavioral component to it as well that could, be the same as any addiction out there that isn't necessarily like, oh, you have to be consuming something that's immediately changing your brain chemistry in order for it to cause an addictive type of response. Is that your perspective, or do you see it differently?
Yeah, most of what you said, I definitely agree with. And what you're mentioning there, the shopping and the sex and all of that, it's what we call process addictions. And with addiction, we now know that it's really one disease and there's just different outlets. And people can, most people have more than one outlet throughout their lives. Some people have one and then they switch to another and then switch to another, or they have multiple things going on at the same time. So someone that's sugar addicted can also be addicted to online shopping or something else. So I can't remember exactly the question that you just asked, but I hope that answers it.
Yeah. Well, and I think my point is to say that, sugar definitely affects the brain, but anything we eat affects the brain, right? It's not like sugar is the only thing that affects our brain response. But I know that there's a big argument about sugar not being addictive because they're always looking at like something like cocaine, which very strongly immediately affects your brain chemistry. And my point is to say that it doesn't necessarily have to be something like cocaine in order to create an addiction. And I think sometimes when people downplay the possibility that something that isn't, this massive impact on everybody's brain, because I'm pretty sure everyone that does cocaine will probably have a pretty strong brain response to it, that you can still have an addictive brain response to something that could be actually relatively benign in the average person, right? Like most people can do online shopping and not get addicted to it. But as you said, there's certain people whose brain tends to respond with a more addictive type of response, especially to certain things that are triggering their brain to respond that way. Is that what you're saying?
Definitely. And I think that to say that if someone is addicted, like they are going to have an immediate brain response, whether it's the shopping or the sugar. I think the difference that can be made with cocaine and other hard drugs is that the consequences may not be seen physically as soon. However, we see diabetes, heart disease, all kinds of different metabolic diseases. These are the results of this sugar addiction in many people. So yeah, the downstream effects might not happen as quickly, but they're just as detrimental. They do hurt people in a really hard way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that could be said for any addiction, right? Like there's always consequences, and whether it's physical body consequences or bank account consequences, relationship consequences, it's rare that an addiction would be something that has no effect on a person's life, right? So yeah, like I said, I just mentioned that because I think one of the arguments I've seen, and we might get to this later, is that, if we call sugar an addictive substance, people go straight to like, oh, well, it doesn't do what cocaine and I use cocaine as an example. That happens to be the drug that I feel like is always, maybe because it looks like sugar. I don't know. I've never seen cocaine in real life, but it's, white powder substance. But I think any of those like hard drugs or even prescription drugs that create dependencies, it's like people want to go straight to comparing it to that. And they don't necessarily look at the more like benign, quote unquote, type of things that, again, a lot of people can handle just fine and it doesn't create an addiction, but other people it does. So now just to make it a little bit more practical for people who are listening that might be wondering how they would know if they have a sugar addiction, what would be some signs that they could be looking out for?
Sure. So I do have a quiz that we can link to in the show notes, but I can read a couple of the questions. There's 6 in total. That we can go through if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay. So as I'm reading through them, if I say the word sweets or sugar, this can be any carbohydrate. It can be pasta, bread, cookies, dessert. It doesn't have to be a sweet tasting food, but something that's a processed carbohydrate. So the first question is, in the past year, have you eaten more sweets than you intended to, or have you spent more time using sugar or sweets than you intended to? So if you click yes, then that's 1 point. Number 2, have you ever neglected some of your usual daily responsibilities due to using sweets or overeating? 3, have you felt that you wanted or needed to cut down on eating sweets in the last year? 4, if anyone, either family, friends, healthcare professionals, knew about your eating habits, would they object or protest? And 5, have you ever found yourself preoccupied with wanting sweets, or have you found yourself thinking a lot about sweets? And the last one, number 6, have you ever used sweets or food to relieve emotional discomfort, such as fatigue, irritation, sadness, anger, tiredness, or boredom? So this is a screening tool that we use. And if you answer yes to 2 or more questions, then it's likely that this indicates a problem, and we recommend further counseling And one of the ways that we do that is through what's called a sugar assessment. So this is something that my mentor, Bitten Johnson, has created with a group of other professionals, and it is based off of the DSM-5. So it's actually recently been accepted as a professional diagnostic tool, and it's a much longer questionnaire. It goes through about 60 or more questions to really hone in on the background and extenuating circumstances, all related to sugar addiction. So if you did answer yes to 2 or more of those questions, then I would recommend getting in touch with myself or another professional who you trust in regards to sugar or carb addiction.
So it's interesting. I was listening to those questions that you were asking. And when I think back to previous lifetimes, so like, I don't know, maybe like early to mid 20s, essentially, I probably would have checked off more than 2 of those. However, now I think about my current situation and I might have checked off 1. Like I do think the one about, using sugar to, what was it? Like the last one was around like soothing emotions or something.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've done that in the last year. It's not something that's like a typical response to stress or anything, but I feel like, most of us, I'm sure, have had a moment or 2 where we're like, I'm going to have some chocolate because I had a rough day and I want to treat myself. So it's interesting to me to think that back when I was younger, I would have had much more of those behaviors shown. And so I'm wondering, with the whole tendency piece, is that always the case that people's brains are just wired that way? Or is it possible that there might be some circumstances? Like in my case, I was dieting a lot and I was avoiding a lot of foods and I was very preoccupied with my body and the way that I looked and trying to lose weight and all of that. For some people, is it more like a situational type of preoccupation with sugar? Or do you think that it's always the case that their brain reacts differently to sugar?
It's definitely going to always be the case that once you're sugar addicted, like there's no going back. You have it and you can put it into remission, but you're always going to be addicted. However, like I said, that was a screening tool. It doesn't guarantee that you have sugar addiction. In the sugar addiction recovery world, we do like to differentiate between 3 groups of people, and one of them we call jokingly normal or earth people. So those people who can look at a dessert and they don't even care. Doesn't even really register for them. There's also people who we call harmful users. So they may eat sweets and they may suffer physical consequences from them, but they don't have that feedback loop in their brain, that dopamine response system that tells them, I want more, I want more, I want more. So yeah, it is possible that, and I mean, I can't say for sure, but perhaps you were a harmful user earlier in your 20s, and that was contributing to some of the symptoms that you had and the feelings that you felt. However, and I'm speaking completely hypothetically, there are a lot of things that we can do to support recovery. And I know that you yourself have done a lot of personal discovery and working on yourself and improving. So all of that is really, really important. And we highly encourage that in terms of recovery from sugar addiction. And I think that those kinds of things are helpful for anyone, no matter whether you're sugar addicted or not. And yeah, they are just really helpful to help on the recovery journey.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were saying there was 3 categories of people. One is people that really don't care about sugar. The middle one was the harmful users. Is the 3rd category the actual people who are addicted?
Yes.
Okay. So there's probably a lot of people that would be similar to me, where if they were engaging in problematic behaviors with food or restricting a lot, because really when you're in a restricted state and your body needs calories, it's not unusual for it to go for the easiest source of calories, which sugar and sugary things is a very tempting way to get calories in for the average person. So then there's also, like you said, a category of people that are really having more of that that brain response in an addictive pattern. And so it sounds like you said that the more in-depth screening tool, or did you call it a screening tool? The first one was a screening tool. The second one was, what did you call that?
Sugar assessment.
So the assessment tool sounds like that would be a more in-depth way to determine if it's truly an addiction, or maybe it might just be more of a, hey, maybe you're just not nourishing yourself appropriately. And once you were well nourished, you wouldn't feel this drive to have sugar. Is that kind of how it starts to shake out when you're going deeper with somebody?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to explain it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I do think, again, when we're thinking about people, there could be some skepticism, right? Because there is kind of a big push from certain, and I apologize, you guys hear my dog barking. He clearly does not like the UPS man today. What I was going to say is that there is a lot of pushback, especially with like the health at every size community, and just overall the people who are anti-diet a lot of times are very adamantly opposed to this concept. And I think it's important to realize that there's different types of addictive behaviors, right? Like you might have a behavior that's driven by an actual physiological deficit, which I think the anti-diet people tend to be more focused on that. But I feel like and it sounds like this is what you're saying, that you're losing a group of people who really do have that unhealthy brain response, even if they're eating what they need to be eating on a day-to-day basis to meet their needs. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that something you just said there touched on another really important point. A lot of people that are opposed to calling sugar addiction what it truly is fear that by labeling people as sugar addicted, then we attach a stigma to it and it creates a whole nother problem. However, in my experience and the experience of my mentors, we see that once people realize that they can put a name to the problem that they've been suffering with, they actually are flooded with relief, because for years, usually in most cases, decades, they have just thought there's something wrong with me. Why can't I eat normally? I know what I'm supposed to do, but why can't I do it? Once they realize that there's actually something that's different about the wiring of their brain, they are so relieved. I think that's it's a big hurdle that we're currently facing. But once this message spreads, I think that people will start to accept that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can totally see how if we're always thinking about, addictions come from things like drugs, then you could argue, well, that just means nobody should be doing those things. So if it comes to sugar, I don't think this is necessarily true, but I think one of the anti-diet perspectives is that it would create this belief that nobody should ever touch sugar and that everybody's going to get addicted if they eat it. And I feel like if we look at things like alcohol or shopping or sex, like obviously there's plenty of people that can consume that stuff in moderation and it doesn't become an addiction. So I can see how the people who do develop addictions to those things, if they're able to identify it and name it, that's going to be way more helpful to them than if they just think there's something wrong with them. Because nobody's going to say, well, because shopping addiction exists, that means nobody should ever shop. Like, obviously, that's not what people are saying. So I do find it interesting that in the food world, because of this divide of perspectives, it kind of turns into this like, you either think everybody's addicted to sugar or you think nobody's addicted to sugar and that it's nonsense. And I like that. It sounds like your school of thought comes into the middle and says like, no, not everybody is addicted to sugar, but the people who are need help and really need to approach things differently.
Yeah. And that's very well said. I don't think that everybody has to avoid sugar 100% of the time, but for those who are sugar addicted, then staying away from those drug foods, the sugars, that is really of utmost importance, because once we remove them from our life, we start to see the world a little more clearly. And just like an alcoholic, once they remove the alcohol, they can go on to live a healthy life. It's the same for the sugar addict.
Mm-hmm. So just to clarify that, do you feel like 100% abstinence is part of the recovery plan? Or is there a point where somebody who has had that diagnosis can go back to having it in moderation? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I definitely believe that abstinence is the way for those who have become sugar addicted. With that being said, that looks different for for all kinds of different people. Part of that depends on how far the disease has progressed, because we do know that addiction is a chronic progressive disease. So depending on where we catch it, there might be a little more leniency in the diet. There may not be. I mean, even if we catch it early, some people just do better with a much more strict food plan. And then within that, yeah, I mean, some people do really good with like a strict carnivore diet. Some people, they can eat all kinds of things. Some people, dairy is really triggering for them. And we know that dairy does release opioid-like substances. So that can be one reason why nuts and seeds can be really triggering for some people. But others can include all of these in their food plan. So it's definitely really individualized. What we say is, like, when you're beginning, the best place to start is sugar, flour, processed food free. And then kind of on top of that, it's not a sugar, but we really encourage to avoid the seed oils or the processed vegetable oils, because they are just really harmful for our overall health. So when we're trying to heal our brain and our body, then tacking on that one to the avoidance of sugar, flour, and processed foods is really powerful.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting that you mentioned nuts, because I'm sure most people wouldn't look at nuts as being like a sugar addiction issue. But if they do create an addictive response, then obviously it's any food, right? Any food that's creating that response in somebody's brain would be something that maybe isn't ideal for them to be eating.
Yeah, the nuts is kind of an interesting one, because nature designed them as a wonderful food. They're part fat, they're part protein, and they're part carbs. So, when we need quick energy, they're the perfect thing. But we most often see nuts salted and processed in other ways. So adding that salt to them really can amp up the addictive properties of them, not to mention like nut butters and things like that. So, I mean, if we were to have to, crack each nut as we eat them, then they probably wouldn't be as big of a problem. But the way that they're available in our food system can definitely lead to a problem.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like that's the case for so many different foods, right? If you think about like even having to forage for nuts, the amount of energy and time that would take, and then having to crack them open and then eating them, it's like the likelihood that you could overeat on nuts before industrial food was created. It's like probably not something most people had to think about. But unfortunately, as you know, I'm sure our food supply has been now designed to be maximally convenient, and it makes it so that foods that wouldn't have been so easily accessible are now, you could have a gallon jug full of mixed nuts in your pantry if you wanted to, that you could be eating at any time. And I say this as someone who, when I was first doing my paleo thing back in 2011, so 10 plus years ago, I definitely was eating a ton of nuts, because it was like, oh, this is paleo and I'm not allowed to eat like other things, so I'm just going to eat as many nuts as I possibly can. And it definitely did not work very well for my health. Let's just say that. So just to get back to that conversation about the people that deny the existence of sugar addiction, or say that calling sugar addiction an addiction is something that's, creating a stigma and creating unnecessary fear around sugar, what would you say to that type of person who feels so strongly that sugar addiction is not a real thing?
Well, I just think that they are being naive, because the evidence is out there to show that it is indeed a true issue in our world. And I am working with a group of people trying to get sugar addiction recognized in the DSM. And there's another group that is working to get it recognized in the ICD. So I am hopeful that professionally this will be accepted, because the evidence is out there. It's just not formally presented in such a way that our medical professional recognize it. But there's many people out there that do support this. Dr. Robert Lustig, Dr. Georgia Eade, Bitten Johnson. There's so many people out there that are doing the research or have reviewed the research. And I don't want to come across rude, but I think that anyone who denies this really is just being naive, because the proof is there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it goes back to what we were saying before about, first of all, understanding what sugar addiction is, because if you think all people are addicted to sugar, then obviously that's not super accurate. And it wouldn't, if that's the argument that's being made, then I can understand why somebody would be like, that's not true, because not everybody is, right? Like you said, there's a whole class of people that really don't care that much about sugar. And so if those people exist, then obviously not everybody is addicted to sugar. And then even mentioning that middle class of people, I really believe that would be the class of people that the anti-diet folks would be going after, right? Is the people that have problematic behaviors with sugar because of a variety of things, right? Like dieting chronically or restriction or chronic stress, all of this. And I'm sure, like you said, you address a lot of that with somebody who is addicted, because we all benefit from looking at how are we soothing stress and how are we, eliminating stress out of our lives and perceiving stress and dealing with triggers and all of that. And this is something I'm sure we talk about this kind of stuff all the time, about this whole like black and white perspective on nutrition. And I do feel like what happens is people start to kind of take like, oh, well, the problem I work with is a nail, so I'm going to use a hammer for everybody, right? And it's like, yeah, the anti-diet and disordered eating type of stuff is very, very important for a class of people, and that's great. But to say that that's the truth for every single person out there, and that somebody who has those addictive tendencies, that feels like there's something wrong with them, that they can't control themselves, that it's negatively impacting their life and their health in such a substantial way, if they're not given the tools to address that, or the affirmation that, hey, it's not you having a problem, it's just how your brain responds to sugar, I feel like it's doing a disservice to that collection of people who do have a different reason for struggling with it. So that's my personal opinion. I am not a sugar expert or sugar addiction expert like Rachel is, but having worked with a large variety of people that dealt with disordered behaviors with eating, I can say that there's definitely certain people that fall into different categories of problematic behavior. And to say that everybody is dealing with the same thing, I think is where we start to get into trouble, which I know that that's not what you're saying. And I think it's really great that we're creating that nuance for people.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point there with the eating disorder community, because I think that eating disorder and food addiction or sugar addiction, there is some overlap, but there's definitely some distinct differences. And the same way that there's a lot of people who have been through that eating addiction model who aren't helped because they aren't addressing the sugar addiction. And same in the opposite side of things, someone who's not addicted, but if they were to go through an addictive recovery model, they might not get all the help that they need if we're not addressing all the areas. Because like I said, there is some overlap, but we definitely have to treat people as the unique person that they are.
Mm-hmm, definitely. So if somebody's listening to this episode and they're questioning, do I have an issue with sugar? Is this an actual addiction as opposed to just, some problematic behaviors I've developed around food? What would be their next step to start to take the journey of figuring this out and really getting a clear diagnosis if appropriate?
So if they would like to go back to those 6 questions that I mentioned, you can reach that quiz through my Instagram, or you can just reach out to me and I can send it to you. From there, if you do answer more than 2 questions, yes, then the next step would be to do a sugar assessment. And that will really dive in deep and give us some really clear answers of where to go next.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that something that you do with people who have already signed up to work with you, or is that before you start working with them? I would just love to know your process so that people would know what to expect. So I know that you offer a strategy call for people if they think they might be sugar addicted. So is the screening happening then, and then you're saying, yeah, looks like you do, let's work together, or does it come later in the process?
Yeah, I mean, we can do the screening tool on the strategy, or if you want to do the tool first and then set up your strategy call, then that's fine. But then, yes, the sugar assessment would come next. And with the sugar assessment, I do give some recommendations, but really only recommend doing the sugar assessment and working with me if you're going to actually commit to a package, because there's not a whole lot that I can help you with in just the one session. And the assessment is a great tool. It really can provide you with like that kind of light bulb moment and really give you some clarity as to what's going on in your brain and your physiology. But I have a program that I recommend, and that sugar assessment is all wrapped up into that. And that is called the Sugar Freedom Recovery Program.
Awesome. And do you only work with people who are the true sugar addiction class, or do you also work with people who just have problematic behaviors with sugar?
I've now pivoted to just working with the sugar addicts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So is that something, I'm just curious because I know that there might be some people out there that they would be committed if they knew that this was something that they had. Because I can imagine, I tend to be someone who like always thinks through what might be the challenge here for somebody. And so if they were thinking, maybe this is an issue for me, do you help them figure out if sugar addiction is a likely issue before they make that commitment?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to clarify that because I could see that if somebody's on the fence about whether it is an actual issue for them, and if you specialize in the person that has the addiction, then that would be something that probably people would like want to know before they make that commitment. Because it sounds like, I think any addiction program is probably a pretty big commitment of time and energy and making changes and diving deep into, what some of the triggers are. And I'm sure you want to make sure that it's, the people that are working with you are the ones that are going to get the most benefit from that, and not necessarily just like self-diagnosing as a sugar addict and then signing up for a program that's like beyond what they were expecting. Because I know there's a lot of programs out there, and I'm sure not all of them are actually truly an addictive recovery type of program.
Definitely. Yeah. I don't want to, I'm not out to scam anybody. I want to help the people that truly need it. And if you were to come through and we did a strategy session and we determined that you fall into the harmful user group, then I would definitely refer you out to somebody, because I don't want to just leave you stranded because you're not a sugar addict. I still want you to get the help that you're searching for. So yeah, I would definitely refer you out to somebody that I trust.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, I ask because I want to make sure that people know that, Rachel's going to make sure that you get the right help. And, I know all the people we work with in the NBA program are very service-oriented people, and I know that you want to serve people in the best way possible. So it sounds like that's a great opportunity for somebody to figure out if they really do need to go through more of an addiction type of recovery program. And if that's the case, then you sound like the person that would be the best fit for them to work with. So, well, it's been really awesome getting to chat with you about, like I said, can be a very controversial topic, but I think we always do our best on the show to take controversial topics and look at the nuance and make sure people know that it's not a one-size-fits-all situation the way that a lot of other nutrition philosophies tend to approach health and nutrition with. I would love to hear from you if there's any last words of wisdom that you want to share with anyone who feels like they're struggling with sugar or questions if sugar addiction is something that they may need to work through.
Yeah, and I think that the best thing that you can do is just to reach out to somebody like myself to determine if that's really the problem. And for those, if you do think that you're sugar addicted, please know that this is not something that you've caused, that you don't have to feel guilty or shameful about it, and that there is hope out there. And if I can do this, then I truly believe that anyone can, because I was totally in shock and awe that was actually the problem that I was dealing with. So if I can come around from that, then I really believe that anyone can.
Yeah. And it sounds like it made a huge impact on your overall quality of life. So I'm sure the people that you work with have a very similar experience.
Definitely.
Awesome. And so we'll share Rachel's links to that quiz that she mentioned. That is that screening process, those 6 questions. And then we'll also put a link to her strategy session if you do that quiz and you get the result that suggests it could be a problem. So that way you can connect with Rachel and get the help that you need if you are someone who is dealing with sugar addiction. And where else can people connect with you if they want to learn more, Rachel?
So you can find me Rachel Murray Holistic Nutrition across most of the social media platforms. I'm most active on Instagram, but you can find me on Facebook as well. And my website is rachelmurrayholisticnutrition.ca.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to all of that in the show notes. If you guys want to connect with Rachel on Instagram, then you can go to episode, let's see, I think this is going to be 120. I'll have to double check. I'll make sure I say it in the intro to make sure we're giving you the right episode number. But if you go to lauraschoenfeldrd.com and look for, you can actually just search Rachel's name, Rachel Murray, and you'll be able to find her episode and get those links. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Rachel. It was a pleasure to chat with you and to dive deep into sugar addiction. And I'm so excited that people will have the opportunity to get help with something that has a solution that they might not have been aware of before.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and being open to exploring this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks to all of you for hanging out with us for the last 45 minutes or so, and we'll look forward to seeing you here next week on the Fed and Fearless podcast. Take care, everybody. Are you a dietitian or nutritionist business owner that wants to create an online business that consistently brings in dream clients who actually want to buy your services, but you're struggling to figure out the right business strategy to get there? Then keep listening, because I have a special opportunity that will help you create the highly profitable and impactful nutrition business that you always wanted. Inside my signature group coaching program, the Nutrition Business Accelerator, created exclusively for nutrition and dietitian entrepreneurs, you'll learn how to start, grow, and scale your online business to 6 figures and beyond, so you can experience the financial and time freedom that you desire. I created this program to help struggling nutrition entrepreneurs get clarity on who they serve, how they serve them, and how they can stand out in a crowded market so that they can more easily attract dream high-paying clients into their online nutrition business. This program is for brand new business owners and nutrition students, as well as those who have been in business for months or maybe even years, but aren't getting the traction that they'd like to see in their growth. Inside the NBA, you'll learn the most important foundational business building and marketing principles, not just the latest tools like social media, so that way you can experience sustainable business growth that adapts to the constantly changing world of online business. Over the course of 12 weeks, I'll show you how to attract high-paying clients who are excited to work with you and willing to pay you the rates that you deserve. You'll get training on how to effectively sell your services in a way that feels authentic and converts prospects into paying clients without feeling pushy or salesy. And you'll get step-by-step instructions on how to create programs and services that provide truly transformative results, leading to glowing testimonials and referrals from your current clients, so you can have the greater impact that you desire in the world around you. You'll also learn how to manage your time, your energy, and your resources so you can get more done in less time and experience the freedom that you really got into entrepreneurship for. When you apply what you learn in the NBA program, you'll never have to feel stuck or overwhelmed in your business again. Want to make this your reality? Then the Nutrition Business Accelerator is your pathway to achieve all of this and more. Get the proven strategy that has helped hundreds of business owners start, grow, and scale their nutrition businesses to $5,000 to $10,000 months and beyond, and accelerate your progress to build the nutrition business of your dreams. Go to lauraschoenfeld.com/NBA to learn more about the program and get your name on the wait list so that you can be the first to know when our doors are open for our next round. That's lauraschoenfeld.com/NBA, which is short for Nutrition Business Accelerator. If you have big dreams of running your own profitable and joy-filled nutrition business, you do not want to miss out on this one-of-a-kind business coaching opportunity. I can't wait to support you inside the NBA program.